Hello, Gen Genies. Before we get started, Rich and I want to let you in on some exciting updates for our Patreon subscribers.
Patreon is a site where listeners can pledge a small monthly amount, either $5 or $10, to support the cost of bringing you your favorite podcast.
All patrons get early access to new CutOff Jeans episodes before they're released to the public.
And along with our undying gratitude, you'll also be able to join our special patron-only Facebook group.
But the most exciting new perk is exclusive access to essays I'm writing from my upcoming memoir. And you guys can help me be editors.
New Patreon supporters will also get a shout-out on the podcast.
Rich and I enjoy bringing you the CutOff Jeans podcast and would mean so much if you would consider supporting our labor of love.
Just go to patreon.com/CutOff Jeans podcast.
Thank you all so much, my Gen Genies.
And now, on with the show.
Is your family tree a mystery? Are you fascinated by genealogy? Well, hip hip hooray, let's talk DNA with Julie.
The truth is in your genes.
In CutOff Jeans.
Welcome to CutOff Jeans, the podcast that helps you find your truth using nothing but DNA. I'm Julie Dixon-Jackson, and I'm a genetic genealogist, henceforth known as a Gen Genie.
And I am Richard Castle, the co-host and producer of this podcast. Merry Christmas to you, Julie. A little early, but, we're in the season.
'Tis the season to celebrate whatever holiday you celebrate.
I do remember several years ago, I was playing the piano at a Christmas party, and I wished somebody happy holidays, and the guy said, "It's Merry Christmas."
Oh, jeez.
And this was 2014, like pre-Trump, and I was like, oh my God.
You know, people are still, people have always been so offended that there might be other holidays around the same season.
I said to him, not for everybody.
And Mazel Tov.
And Mazel Tov, exactly. So anyway, what's going on in DNA news, Julie?
Oh, let's have a bit of good news, shall we?
Oh, I love it,
Please?
yes.
For the season and all. Okay, so I found this in the Washington Post. A baby was taken from her mother's arms in the Holocaust.
Oh, that's good news.
Yeah, what a terrible way to start that. But there's going to be a happy-ish ending. Okay, so there were these two sisters, Jean Gearhart and Dina Morris, who had been born in Austria and raised in Ohio. And they had been told all their lives that their mother had been in a concentration camp and had had a baby girl named Ava, and she was separated from her. They took her from her, never to be seen again.
The Nazis took her baby, Ava.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And somehow the mother survived and went on to marry and have these two girls. I think there was a son as well. And but she'd always looked for this baby that she didn't know what had happened to. The mother's name was Dora Rappaport, and she had given birth apparently in the concentration camp, according to documents. She was sent to several concentration camps during the war, and she watched as her immediate family perished in a gas chamber. Somehow she was spared. Don't know why. And once she was liberated in 1945, she moved to Austria, and but never knew what happened to her baby. She met her husband, who was also a Holocaust survivor, and they got married and had two daughters and emigrated to America in 1949.
Okay.
The couple spoke little of their experience in the war, for obvious reasons.
Very common.
It's very common, yes. Especially not to their children, whom they raised in Canton, Ohio, and advised to keep their Jewish identity a secret.
Isn't that something that they asked them to keep the Jewish identity a secret? I'm sure that's
it's
part of...
It's not at all surprising.
Right? Because they felt like if this happens again, they don't want to have a repeat. And be persecuted again. I mean, it's
sure. And there is anti-Semitism, as we all know, in the United States as well.
There is.
There is. You would know more than I, my friend.
It's called Merry Christmas.
And that's what we call a callback. So one of the daughters said she spent her whole life looking for this child. It affected her mentally really badly. Over the years, she took multiple trips to orphanages in Germany on a quest for information about her beloved Ava. Despite her persistence, her lifelong search yielded no information. She had a single photograph of her firstborn child that she sometimes slept with, her daughters recalled. She would cradle the black and white framed image tightly in her arms like a baby.
Oh, that's so sad. Oh.
That it hurts my stomach and my heart. So she died in 1998, the mother, and they vowed to continue looking for their older sister. They scoured death records and online databases and even went to the Red Cross seeking answers, to no avail. They didn't know where to begin.
Right.
For obvious reasons, there are very few records from the Nazis were available.
And I mean, honestly, I would assume if they took a newborn baby away from her, that the baby was killed.
In 2020, everything changed. The sisters had done a DNA test, and in April received an email from MyHeritage confirming they had a genetic match with a woman in Britain, and her match was consistent with her being a niece. Which is a very close match.
Yeah.
Meaning the centimorgan amount would have been very high. Across the ocean, Claire Ray, 53, their supposed niece, received the exact same email. At first, she was skeptical, since it was always the case that her mom didn't have any family. Her mother, Evelyn Ray, she was now called Evelyn, knew next to nothing about her infancy or roots. All she had was one weathered document claiming that her birth name was Hava, the Hebrew equivalent of Ava, and that she was born in 1945 in the concentration camp Bergen-Belsen. She didn't even know her own birthday. She was adopted when she was about 7 years old from an orphanage in Israel by a Jewish couple based in Britain. She believed that her birth family had probably died in the Holocaust.
Right.
See? Despite her doubts that they were still alive, she tried to find out as much information as possible, but there was always a closed door. She died in 2014 of pancreatic cancer.
Oh.
Yeah.
They never lived to know that the other was alive.
Exactly. So Ray was wary about the DNA match, she said, and her possible aunts felt the same way. Given that neither she nor Gerhard had ever left America since they arrived as young children, the prospect of having a niece in Britain felt pretty inconceivable. But their shared doubts abruptly diminished when they traded photos. The similarities between their mother, Dora, and her presumed daughter, Ava, were striking.
Wow.
As they talked over the phone, they realized that the late mother and daughter had more in common than just their physical appearance. There were so many likenesses. It was amazing. Gerhardt said that she described her mother as fun and glamorous with an infectious personality and a love of sparkles and dancing. Her daughter, Ava, or Evelyn, as she was later known, was much the same, they discovered. Her daughter said she wasn't a very good cook, she wasn't a very good housekeeper, but she was someone you wanted to be around all the time. She was great fun.
Oh, that's neat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I never thought we would have the ability to find my mother's family, Gerhardt said. I can't even tell you what it means to us, just the fact that we actually got to find her. So they had numerous phone calls and text exchanges, but didn't see each other virtually until an emotional Zoom interview was facilitated by the Today Show in June of 2020. From then on, they had regular video calls and quickly got to know one another and their families, including Ray's 3 siblings and her children, plus Morris and Gerhardt's younger brother and the 4 children between them. During their calls, Ray finally learned what had happened to her maternal grandmother. There are so many discrepancies with the dates and several other things, Morris explained, adding that it's not clear why the document stated that Evelyn Ray was born in 1945 in Bergen-Belsen, but it's possible that the information was falsified to help her get adopted.
Yeah.
The details didn't matter.
Well, I mean,
though.
also, though, I just question, like, what happened? Who saved that baby when they took her from her mother? I mean, you assume that,
right.
The baby couldn't have existed, couldn't have lived on her own. She was too young.
Yeah.
So somebody took care of that child.
Yeah, the mother survived.
Right.
So I'm trying to think why they would have separated them in the first place.
Well, I mean, yeah.
Maybe they always took babies. Well, yeah.
I can't imagine.
Maybe they always took babies, though. Yeah, who knows what else that poor mother went through there.
This was a bittersweet story in that it's very sweet that they were able to find each other It's just sad that both of the mother and the daughter died before this golden age of DNA, where everybody is finding these lost relatives, and that they died without knowing.
Yeah. It's really, really sad. They did finally get to meet. The niece made a trip to Ohio and surprised them, which is amazing. They spent 2 weeks together. And her only complaint was that it went by far too fast.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's incredibly bittersweet. She said she should be here for this, meeting her mother. So still more than 75 years after a mother and daughter were tragically torn apart, their lineage is at long last inextricably linked again.
Oh, that is a nice story, Julie.
See, I told you. It started out kind of bleak.
Yeah, I've got this really great, happy story about the Holocaust. Said nobody ever.
Yeah, that was kind of a bad setup, I know.
Okay.
Oh gosh. So yeah, that is a happy story. But as you said, I mean, my father passed away 8 years before I found that side of the family, and I spent 25 years looking for him.
Right.
If DNA had been available earlier, it wouldn't have happened.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Wow. Shall we take a break?
Okay.
If you're enjoying our podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review, or consider supporting us on our Patreon page, patreon.com/CutOff Jeans Podcast. Now back to Julie and me.
Hey, Rich.
Hey, Julie.
You know how last week we kind of took a deep dive into that 48 hours story.
Honestly, I wake up thinking about it still. And I've talked to several people about it and told the story, even though
it lives in you.
Even though they haven't seen it, they feel like they've seen it because I've talked about it.
I'm surprised it hasn't had more of an impact. We talked about how there was so much that was unsaid. And so many missing years that we wanted more.
Yeah, to refresh our audience in case they did not happen to listen to last week's episode, this was a 48 hours TV show that did a report about a girl who was adopted as like a 9-year-old in Russia back in the 90s by a couple in Georgia. And then they came to believe that she was psychotic, and they feared for the life of a younger boy that they had also adopted from Russia. And they ended up taking her back to Russia and leaving her in what can only be called an asylum.
An institution.
Yeah. It was pretty horrific. They basically returned her to the store,
Right. And that's how the story ended in the original 48 Hours in 1997.
And then they went back and found this girl who is an adult now and has children of her own and is living of all places, I think in Florida now, but she was
North Carolina.
North Carolina, that's right.
One of the Carolinas.
She was adopted by another family in the United States. And it seemed by all intents and purposes that she was healthy and happy and, had no trauma whatsoever, which, we all kind of questioned, like, what happened? Did she get treatment?
She didn't present as having trauma. She seemed, she had 4 daughters, was very active in her church, had done some volunteer work internationally.
Yes.
And was now, I believe she was a nurse or a nurse's assistant. Right. And it was great to see her so happy and so well,
seemingly well adjusted, considering what happened to her.
Well adjusted,
yeah, exactly.
But at the same time, you just wanted to hear more.
Exactly.
There was so much missing, and so I took it upon myself to do a little research and see if I could see if anything else was written about her or if she'd done any other interviews or anything.
Good for you.
And I actually found her on social media.
Oh of course you
did.
And
I reached out to her, and she accepted my friend request.
Wow.
Yeah, and which was amazing. And I messaged her and, we talked a little bit. I said, I'm also an adoptee and I do this podcast about the adoptee experience and yours is extraordinary. And would you consider coming on the podcast to tell us more? And she responded, what would you guys like to know? And so I told her about the missing pieces and how it's such a riveting story and we wanted to get her story out or what have you.
Yeah.
And I didn't or haven't yet heard back from her.
Oh, okay. Oh, that I hope that she writes back to you. That would be great if we could get her on the show and ask her the questions that we had after watching that 48 hours.
Right. Well, I think she knows that that's what we want, and I think if she ultimately decides not to, that means she doesn't want to talk about it.
Which is her right,
Yes, and that would explain the 48 hours too.
Right.
I suppose. It was on her page. A lot of people had reached out who had watched it as well.
Oh, I bet.
And there was one person that had provided a link to something, and she is a part of an organization that exposes child psychology that is
questionable.
Maybe fringe.
Okay.
Questionable is a good way to put it. Yeah, that have maybe since been debunked, possibly as a feasible way therapy. And she mentioned, and I mentioned this too in the original story. They spoke to the psychiatrist who had treated her, and he had mentioned that she had an attachment disorder. And I remember thinking, well, of course she has an attachment disorder. That's almost all adoptees have an attachment disorder.
Yes, you mentioned that.
Some sort.
Yeah, you mentioned that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, and which is perfectly normal and expected. This woman referenced that the way that he was talking sounded a lot like a type of therapy called attachment therapy that was done on children, particularly children that had been adopted or had come into a family that had grown up in an institution per se, or an adoptee. And it sounded like, and I'm spitballing here because I didn't do that deep of a dive here, but it sounded like what he was referring to was this attachment disorder, which is different from reactive attachment disorder, which is a standard attachment issue that adoptees have. But they believe all adoptees have this disorder, and that makes them all, or could make them, borderline psychotic and incapable of, or basically being a psychopath, not having a conscience, not you know what I mean, not knowing right from wrong.
That is painting a very large community with a big brush.
Yes, indeed.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's obviously controversial and questioned, and I don't know for sure if that's what this doctor subscribed to or prescribed to.
It sounds a bit like quackery, and I am certainly no psychologist, but to say that if you're adopted, you're more likely to be a psychopath is making a big leap.
I mean, you know what? If you're adopted, you are more likely to have emotional issues. That's a simple fact.
Having emotional issues is different than being a psychopath.
Exactly. I mean, it's a basic fact is that people who are adopted are 4 times more likely to commit suicide than people who are not adopted. I didn't know that. That's just a fact. That doesn't make them psychotic. But so I'm wondering if that was what that was all about.
Well, there was the doctor that diagnosed her on the 48 Hours episode back in the 90s. They tried to reach out to him again today, and he didn't want to be interviewed, or he declined, So, and it was probably good that he did, like for his own career, because it wouldn't have made him look too good. It didn't make him look good. And they didn't interview the parents that sent her back either, because, of course, they really didn't end up coming out looking good at all.
Yeah, no, I'm not. We've talked about it last time.
Yes.
What was it that made them think that this is something they would like to do on camera?
Right. Well, it's interesting that we're talking about this again, because last week when we recorded that podcast, you shared something very personal about you and your marriage, and you even prefaced it with saying, I don't even know if I want you to keep this in the podcast, and we didn't. Last week, because you wanted a chance to speak with your husband, because it was about, it was regarding both of you and your husband.
It was regarding a conversation we had in passing, really, at the beginning of our marriage.
Well, you felt that before we included it in the podcast, you wanted to do.
I wanted to talk to him about it.
Because, he's a private person and he's not a public persona like you are, being, the host of this podcast.
It's certainly something that is happened within a marriage, and it has been 25 years since, and I think we've both grown since then, and both come to a deeper understanding of both of our experiences.
Well, and I would argue that maybe part of the reason that you are still together after 25 years is because of this kind of a healthy dialogue that you have and a respect. So, anyway, because he said it's okay for you to share and he's fine with it, let's play that little take right now.
I'm going to say something right now that I may have you edit out.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know if I should say this.
Right.
When my husband and I first got married, I wanted to have babies right away. And I was worried that I wouldn't be able to get pregnant just because of certain things in my life that had occurred, that I was afraid that I may not be that fertile. So we were having a conversation one day, and this was on our first year of marriage. And I said, well, how would you feel about adopting if it came down to that? Mm-hmm. And my husband said, without missing a beat, I couldn't raise somebody else's child. Mm. And at the time, you know what? It didn't bother me so much at the time, even though I was like, hi, adopted person right here. But that's how much it wasn't on our radar back then, by the way. That's before the fog. That was before I was out of the fog. All of my trauma really manifested long after that. And I had a period of time where I remembered that, and I really laid into my husband about it. Like, how could you say that to an adopted person? And we've really talked a lot about it. And he apologized, and he's like, I was much younger. I wasn't thinking, blah, blah, blah.
Sure.
And now we've kind of come full circle, or I've kind of come full circle. And I actually appreciate that he said that to me.
Oh, interesting.
Because that's incredibly self-aware. And I feel like he was just being honest. And as painful as it is for an adoptee to hear, that it's a fact of life, that not everybody wants to adopt children and can love adopted children. So that was that, and I've kind of come full circle on it, and I kind of feel like I owe him an apology for laying into him about that, because he was being authentic. Maybe not as sensitive as would be required, but I think he honestly didn't even think about the fact that I was adopted in that moment.
Right.
Yeah.
And he was younger, and you were not a genetic genealogist, and this was not something that you were talking about every day in your life.
Yes. I mean, it was long after I'd found my biological mother, and before I'd had kids, and before I'd gone on this other massive journey,
right.
Which has taken me to a different place. And there's so much to unpack in this situation.
Well, I'm glad that you shared that story, and it's a tribute to you, who you are, and to your marriage, quite frankly, that you were able to look at it in such a healthy way. Like you said, to come back full circle, to know that there was something that bothered you for a long time, that you laid into him, and that you brought it, that years later you're remembering it and kind of reconfiguring it in your mind to fit how you feel right now.
It's funny because there was a huge chunk of time before I even remembered him saying that.
Sure.
And so that was when I laid into him about it. And that was more recently. And so it hasn't been as huge a chunk of time since I've turned the corner again and gone back to where I think maybe because he apologized to me.
Right.
And he really internalized that could have been triggering for me. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Yeah, I think he did some of his own work and realized that there were things said that you probably shouldn't say to adopted people.
Right, and I would hope that other people would have the same kind of self-knowledge and self-awareness to think about that before they do say something like that to anybody, because you don't know anybody's situation.
Right. Well, and we also, this is, people make mistakes, and we have to, and this is about, like you said, it's about having the emotional maturity to work on, to look at what you did and what it meant and what it could have meant, and kind of come full circle and realize that that's probably one of the most honest things he could have said. And I wish more people would say that.
Right. So, yeah, I thought that was a really a nice thing to share and important. As I said last week, it's a testament to your marriage and to the two of you. And thank you, Julie's husband.
Well, thanks, honey. Thanks. Good job. I think he's really come a long way since then. And truth be told, when he first said it to me, it didn't have that big of an impact on me until years later, when I was out of the fog and into this whole experience of what I do now, that I kind of had a flashback like, oh my God, did he really say that?
Well, as anyone who's been in a long-term relationship or marriage can attest, things get thrown back up in your face many years later.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, kudos to him. And it also made me that when we were talking about that, he and I, when we're talking about letting it be on the podcast, he also came to me and he mentioned something about somebody else that he's following on social media who's a board gamer. He's a board gamer, and he's kind of has his own niche on social media and board games. And he said, I have this follower that I guess she's an adoptee too. And I was looking at some of her memes and about adoption, and it's really dark. And I said, well, what do you mean by dark? And he's like, I don't know. I'm like, well, what's her name? And he gave me her username, and I looked it up. And sure enough, she follows me, and I follow her too, which is not surprising, especially on TikTok. TikTok adoptee it moves along pretty fast, and there's a lot of conversation and a lot of pushback from the adoption community and from the adoptive community.
Could you elaborate?
For years and years and years, there was one narrative that was that adoption is beautiful, and there are no losers in adoption. But the voices of said adoptees were never heard in the situation, and partially because we were kind of conditioned that you don't talk about anything bad. Your experience, because you will be painted as ungrateful.
Ungrateful that someone adopted you. Yes.
Yeah, that someone adopted me, and why am I complaining about my emotional issues and blaming it on adoption when I was saved by these people?
I understand.
And all that
so
stuff.
There was only one side of the issue.
Right. There's only one narrative. And whenever, and so now more and more adoptees are speaking out about it, such as adoption is trauma, and the primal wound is real, and all of these experiences that we have and we relate to with each other. And there's a lot of pushback on TikTok, especially from the adoption industry and adoptive people who feel like they're being personally attacked because somebody has a negative experience with adoption. And so then it becomes about, well, not all adoptees and not all adoptive parents and blah, blah, blah. Just like, not all cops, not all black people, not all white people.
I see.
The same thing.
I see. Yes.
The same thing.
Yeah. Again, painting with that very big brush.
Exactly. And so the fact that he noticed this and brought it up to me as if it was something unusual kind of made me realize or remember, I guess, that people that are not involved in adoption in any way and just maybe have a few friends who are adopted and blah, 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 have no idea, have never heard this kind of narrative before because they have no reason to seek it out.
Maybe what you should do is wait about 25 years, set a timer on your phone, wait 25 years, and then bring it back up to your husband again and say, I remember when you
See what he says then, right? Hey, remember that? Remember that time? Yeah. Oh my gosh. Anyway, but I thought it was interesting that he still, even being married to me and everything in the last 5 years that I've been through and what I talk about and what I do for a living, that he still didn't realize that so many of us feel this way and feel the need to talk about it and educate people that are not in the triad and people that need to know what the experience of being adopted is like.
Yeah, it sort of reminds me of the story about the blind man and the elephant.
Do tell.
Okay, I'm going to screw it up. But there's like a blind man that is trying to describe an elephant, and he's feeling it, and he only feels the trunk, and he only can describe the trunk. And another blind man is only feeling like the legs, and he describes the elephant as having these legs. But it's none of it is the whole picture.
Yeah.
Right? It's you're only telling your own personal story from what you gather. Your own perspective.
Exactly. But the problem is the adoption industry want to sweep the negative stuff under the rug. It's going to affect their business. And it's going to make, if adopters, people are thinking about adopting, realize that it's not as easy as it's not always beautiful, and that you have to think more about possible issues that may arise and things that you have to know about adopted children and accept and help them deal with, as opposed to being, a gummy bear with no history and no trauma.
Well, I'll just say that nobody knows what you're in for, right? When you have a baby, whether you have a baby,
right? Even if it's biological, right?
However, I would think that having this knowledge out there is actually going to be beneficial to future adoptive parents who will then have these tools in their toolbox, and it won't be something that they have to sweep under the rug or that they'll be surprised by or shocked, that perhaps they can help their children through this trauma if they know about it and know how other adoptees who have been through it feel.
Absolutely. And I have many friends who have adopted, and I believe that they are on the right side of that. They listen to their children. They're well aware of the ramifications that come with it and the possible issues that may occur, and are proactive in trying to recognize those signs and help their children.
Right. Well, I mean,
and
hopefully people are on the path to enlightenment. I mean, some of the stories we've told in this podcast about, the Magdalene laundries and all these horrible things that have happened where people are wronged by society, because they happen to be pregnant out of wedlock or they happen to be born out of wedlock. And so, I'm hoping that podcasts like ours and the discussions we have will help to enlighten people on all sides of this issue.
Right. I hope so. I'd like to think so.
Shall we take a break?
I think we shall.
Thank you for listening to CutOff Genes with Julie Dixon-Jackson and Richard Castle. You can support us by going to patreon.com/CutOff Genes podcast. Now, back to the program.
Okay, it is story time, and it's part 2 of my conversation with my friend Michele East.
You two are fun together. I like listening to the two of you.
Thank you. I'm very happy with it, and it was just it really did a lot for my soul just hanging out with her and having this conversation with her.
That's nice. Yeah.
Actually, yeah.
So where were we last when we last left off?
So Michele had discovered in her early 20s. At a meal with her mother that she was adopted, and kind of sent her world into a whole other tailspin. And then she began to talk about some of the trauma that happened in her adoptive family, and started to talk about her father's death. And just trigger warning that there is a gun involved. So
let's listen in.
Okay.
The thing that I always go back to. When my father died when I was 12, it was violent. It was violent. There was a gun involved, and there's trigger warning there. We can talk about that in another thing if we want to. But there was a wonderful doctor that my mother worked for. She had been a nurse. And I mean, she wasn't just a nurse. She was like a head nurse. I would say that my mother was definitely a healer. I would say Marie had, she had worked on the Taos Reservation in the 50s. She knew how to shoot for her dinner. She could shoot a rabbit for her dinner. I have an amazing picture of her. You've seen it?
I've seen it
with
in the
my
nun's
mother
habit,
in a nun
with a
habit with cowboy boots, with a machete and a rosary on her belt.
Oh, that's right.
Shooting rabbits.
That is the best
That's
picture.
the stock I come from, and that's in a way that's how I had always seen her. It was no secret that she had left the convent. That's so funny, right? But it would have been a great opportunity for my mom to tell me at that point that I was adopted. Because what it would have done is released me from thinking that Gene was part of my legacy, that should I just say it? Can I? It was a suicide. It was in front of our home in Pomona, California. I've done a lot of work and a lot of writing with it. It was a really awful day. I mean, it was the day after the 4th of July. So I heard it and I went outside. I thought it was a firework. So the doctor and his wife had become very close with us. I would go to their house. Their house was everything I had dreamed of. Laura Ashley, doctor's house in Claremont, California. Everything matched. Everything was clean. There was no combination of avocado, orange, and gold. Well, I was wanting this Laura Ashley clean, sparkling, I knew what was for dinner kind of thing lifestyle. That was in my household. And I guess there had been, Carol had implored my mother to tell me at that point, because I deserved to be free of his actions. Yes. I did deserve that.
Yes.
I deserved to be free.
You were 12.
12.
Oh, my God.
There was a summer between 12 and 13, which is a critical time in a female life, let alone a life. You're so vulnerable to so much influence, negative and positive at that point. And that in itself is a whole nother portion of the story. It only gets I mean, there's just Dave still finds things out.
We have to laugh or we'll cry.
We have to laugh.
Yes. Yes.
And so that would have been a good opportunity. There were several other times where there was an opportunity for her to tell me. And I think, and as she was growing close to her passing, I think she realized that. And I think she had a lot of regret because it tampered with our trust. Because how could I ever trust that relationship again? I always wondered if there was more information. How much more should I have known? How much was she still keeping from me?
Yeah.
And then you look at your whole family and say, why did you keep that from me? My cousins who are like my sisters, and I have another cousin we're so close. I just recently said, why didn't you tell me? And he said, because we were sworn to secrecy. And so in trying to include me, didn't my mother then create the opposite effect?
Yep.
That I was always the other because I was the one that you had to keep the secret from. So they were never completely comfortable with me for fear that they would accidentally say something. And we were a pretty loud bunch. We were a pretty open, non-filtered bunch. I mean, they'd roll over from Italian to English now and then if they didn't want you to know, but that was always the fun. That was always the fun table to listen in because you could figure out what they were talking
You
about.
mean English to Italian?
English to Italian.
Okay, yeah. Because I was like,
And that,
Wait.
that generation would always end up at the big table together.
Of course.
Yeah, and it was quiet.
Oh.
We're the quieter kind of Italians, funny enough, but I know.
okay. So you found this out. What were
Found
the next
this out.
few years like?
The next few years where I felt like I wanted my story. I felt like I deserved my story. And I was having a few minor medical things that I would have been good for me to have a little background on. Nothing serious. But it would have been good for me just to know a few things. So I'm at CalArts, and a friend's father was a PI. And I said, so what do I do? How do I start this? And so he said, just give me what you know. Tell me what you know. And within 24 hours, they had found Peggy. And so this was a few months after I had found out.
Do you know how he did that?
I think it was pretty basic because we knew that they were florists. Oh, little side. I was a florist. My family owned flower shops. My biological family owned flower shops. I had gone to floral school because it was a good side hustle while I was in college. I was a florist, and I came from a family of gardeners and florists.
Wow.
They had 2 shops in Downey and in Long Beach where I was born. Right? I just got chills.
Yeah.
That was
As you should.
bananas when I learned that.
Yeah, that's nuts.
Yeah. So I think he looked her up in the phone book because we had her name.
Oh, you had her name.
We had her name. My mother had her name.
Oh, she had her name.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So that
I think he was a pretty streamlined process. Now, what was the preparation? I'm going to give him a lot of credit for this. He was a really nice guy. They picked me up in a black car when I went to meet people. But the way that they did it, and I think this is still how they do it, they called her up and they had a recording of her voice. Her voice sounds just like my voice. We have the same tone in our voice, Peggy and I. Mm-hmm. And the question was, do you know of a child born in Long Beach, California in 1965? And it gives them the chance to back out, right? She said, yeah, I'll never forget the sound of her voice. They played back the tape to me. And it was really astonishing because she said, well, yeah, I do. And then there was a little bit of conversation. They said, this chokes me up. They said, do you have a message for her? And she said, well, just tell her I love her and that I'd love to meet her. That's amazing. Yeah. She didn't have to have me. Mm-mm. She did not have to have me. She had an out. She was given the opportunity.
There are, now that I've been doing this so long, it's really a 50-50 thing as to how a biological mother will respond. And it goes from that to complete denial, or that to later regressing and changing her mind. So that's a gift.
Yeah.
Right there.
Yeah.
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 So, wow. So it was that easy.
I got the call from the PI when I was in a script analysis class at Cal Arts. And so my whole class knew. They pulled me out of class. And it was a Shakespeare script analysis class. You couldn't get any more perfect timing, right? It was perfect, and I loved that class. Yeah. And I went back in and I said, they just found my mom. And so my whole class was sort of with me on this happening, from finding out I was adopted to this, like the whole thing.
What was the time frame between?
Less than 6 months.
Oh, wow.
Before I decided to go ahead and just know. Mm-hmm. I just decided to go ahead and do it.
Okay. Wow.
And then the meeting part was really intense because my biological grandmother, was not speaking. Listen, this family line, my family of origins, my DNA, there's a lot of pain. There's a lot of addiction. There is a lot of splitting. There is family lines that will never, ever be crossed again. Mm-hmm. And so that doesn't come from judgment. It just comes from like being able to acknowledge it and let it be and know that is not my story.
Right.
This is a whole lot. At this point in my life, a lot of this is sorting out what is mine, what isn't, what am I carrying for my ancestors that I don't even know maybe yet or of. Mm-hmm. What are some cool things that I have seen, like the floristry, like the fact that I have biologically a great Aunt Alice who is a rancher in Oklahoma. Me, my horses, the cow, like everything I love about that. Mm-hmm. It's really fun to have that as part of your story. And that there's parts of the story of adopted family of origins, that I don't have to take that with me. I was carrying that for years. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I don't have to take that with me. It's a huge revelation for me. And I didn't know that I had a choice. which is so crazy that I didn't know I had a choice. I thought it's all just piling on. I have to take it with me. No, it's good.
Yeah.
It's good. So, so the PI picks me up in a shiny black car, and he has arranged meetings in separate places, public places. He was very adamant that public places, because then people can't latch on to you, and they can't have big emotional, like Jerry Springer moments, like "you're my baby." Essentially, being public protects you from all of that. Yeah. And I felt very cared for by this PI. He was so professional, straightforward. He also did ask me before he made the call. He asked me what I'm hoping for and what is the worst case scenario. He made me look at both things. He really prepared me. Good. And I tell this to people I know who are searching. What's the worst case scenario? Best case scenario. I have a cousin, worst case scenario, his parents were not alive anymore. He didn't have the opportunity. So you kind of have to look at all that.
Yeah, that's, I always tell people to hope for the best, but expect the worst. So that they're at least prepared. And another real myth about it is that even though reunion can be happy initially, there's still so much more to keeping a relationship like that I know you know. Yeah. Continue. Sorry.
So this is in the Long Beach Downey area. So first we met Peggy. She has fabulous style, by the way. I love it. She's so creative and clever and funny, like sharp wit, funny. It turns out I'm mostly Scottish, like 39% or something. And so we met her in a restaurant. And what I was most aware of is that I didn't know what I was going to feel. And I remember trying not to anticipate it because I wasn't looking for my mom.
Yes.
I was looking for information. I was looking for a story. My story. All of a sudden, it was personal. Instead of just being this kind of fragmented thing, it was my story. And I had the mother, I had the grandmother, I had those feelings already. Whether they were what other people feel, I'll never know. I don't know what it feels like to have that attachment to bonding like that. I don't know what it's like to be nursed. I don't know what it's like to have that feeling that I had with my own children, where the baby just kind of melts onto your shoulder. I don't know. I don't have a memory of that. It's fascinating to me. So I met Peggy and I instantly liked her. I thought, she's fascinating. This is great. But I have to say, it was almost like a sisterly feeling. I still feel that. I feel like, in a way, our current relationship, there's almost a sisterly thing.
Oh, because she was only 15.
She was only 15. Yeah. And I think I sent you some texts of ours the other night.
Yeah.
We text almost every day, and we try to talk, whenever. There's no pressure.
That's amazing.
It's a non-pressure kind of thing. But she's so fun to talk to, and I've been there for her, and she's been there for me in different ways. We have different skill sets, so it's kind of cool like that. So I met Peggy, had this kind of uneventful lunch. It was fine. She says in reflection, her feeling was she felt like she had toilet paper on her shoe, that she felt so exposed. And I just remember kind of being in awe. But I just remember it being pretty easy. And it was kind of nice to just say thank you. I mean, I still come from that place. Like, she didn't have to go through with that. She was exiled for a while. In order to give birth to me. Amazing.
Did you ask her about your father at that time?
I did. It was still an unknown.
What do you mean?
She didn't know his name.
Okay.
It was a party.
Okay. Oh, wow. Okay.
It was a party. And I think let's make sure we go back to that when we talk about dear old dad.
Yeah.
Because that's just 2 years ago.
That's when I became involved.
That's part 3. I think we might be entering into second part right now.
We've been in chapter 2.
We're in chapter 2. Oh, thank God. So then we went to a different restaurant, and then I met my grandmother, and that was intense. I would say, knowing what I know now about family dynamics, that would have been a hard relationship for me if I had ever seen her again.
Oh, wow.
I got so nervous I had to go to the bathroom and have a cigarette. I felt totally on display because, do you know, the restaurant she chose was like her local coffee shop where she always had breakfast and knew everybody. So I was on display.
Right.
She also brought me a big bouquet of peach roses, not knowing I despise peach roses. I'm a pink rose girl, kind of. You know what I mean? Yes. Like, I thought, just in that little thing in itself, like, to predict that I would want those made me realize, and then she put a bow on it. I was like, oh, no, Grandma doesn't get me at all, does she? And now she had been adopted herself. Oh. So that's why I have so many splicings in my genealogy, because then there's another one, Nova Scotia to Oklahoma to Long Beach. So There you go there. So that was, it was confusing. It was astonishing and made me feel so disconnected from my family that raised me that I then just put it down for a while. I did meet my sister. I have a biological half sister. And I was basing it on what I was feeling when I was meeting these people. I didn't have a lot of feeling, but nice. She was just about to have a baby, so I didn't want to like steal her thunder. I actually got invited to her baby shower, and I didn't want to. I just thought, that's not. Yeah. Let's get together on another time. But then I met my brother Noel. Okay. It was like lightning. It was like lightning striking me. I looked at him, and he looked at me, and we were like, "Where have you been?" I felt so robbed of having that little brother. We looked alike, same. I mean, they called him No Fun Noel because he was so funny. Punk drummer, gorgeous man, great father. And then sadly enough, he died of a heroin overdose about 8 years ago. And I don't think I'll ever quite be okay with that. It was a loss that then represented what could have been, I think, one of my most significant relationships in my life. I felt so protective over him. I felt so I remember looking through the screen door into Peggy's house and seeing him sitting in the chair, and he just got up, and we were like, I will never, this is what I'm saying. We need more language to describe the feeling of some kind of genetic reunification. I just feel like we need more words.
The closest thing I can think of is high wraith. Do you know high wraith?
No.
It's a Welsh word for longing or missing something that you don't even know what it is.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
I need to write that down before we're finished today.
Okay, thank you, Michele. The conclusion of that conversation will be in episode 503 after the New Year.
In the meantime, I would like to wish all of our listeners a Merry Christmas if you celebrate that, a Happy Hanukkah, a Happy New Year, whatever you celebrate. And we look forward to being your podcast next year.
We know you have a lot of choices in podcasts. We want to thank you for choosing us.
And a shout out to our Patreon subscribers as well. So thank you so much for supporting us. I am Richard Castle, and you can go to my website, richardcastle.com, or you can follow me on the Twitter or on Instagram at Castle Songs.
I'm Julie Dixon Jackson. You can go to my website. It's live, you guys.
Shiny and new.
Shiny and new. If you go to cutoffjeans.com, it's a one-stop shop. Everything is there. You can go to the podcast there. You can go to a blog there. You can hire me there. You can look at success stories and pictures and what have you. And I'm really excited about it.
How cool is that?
Yeah, and all of the social media links are on there too, so I don't even have to give them out.
It is one-stop shopping.
And I did it all by myself. Thank you.
Good for you.
Thanks.
Good for you. I think there's one thing that we should leave everybody with for 2021, Julie. What is that?
The truth is in your genes.